Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today we're going to talk about the difference between EQ and saturation. This is going to be a short but a little bit technical one, and specifically it takes place in the domain of the mix down. Now the mix down is the part of your music sculpting process where you try to judge whether all your sounds are correctly placed compared to each other, whether they all have the right balance of various things. And specifically we're talking about frequencies. So each sound has low frequencies, mid frequencies, and high frequencies, anything from 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. And every sound has some combination of those frequencies, which you can see on a spectrogram. Any particular sound usually also has something called a fundamental frequency, which is its leftmost peak, and we use the fundamental frequency to determine its pitch. And then that sound also has harmonics, which are other frequencies that sit above that fundamental frequency that our ear uses to detect the timbre of the sound. So for example, any sound that has a sustained pitch, like for example my voice when I go This is such a stupid idea. You can see on the spectrum analyzer that on the left-hand side, you can see on you can see on the left-hand side of the spectrum analyzer that there are some peaks that stay stable and that you can use to detect the pitch, and then on the right there are the harmonics. So when you're sculpting your sound, you have a choice about how much you want to emphasize various frequencies in a sound, and specifically, for example, how much you want to tilt the sound towards the brighter frequencies or towards the darker frequencies. One reason you might want to tilt a sound in a particular direction is so that it balances better compared to other sounds. For example, if you have a lot of very dark sounds, you might want to emphasize the high clarity of some other sounds so that they contrast together. Or if you have too much contrast in your sound selection, you might want to tilt in the opposite direction so they have more the same shape. So this is an artistic or a creative reason to tilt your sound. Another reason you might want to take control of the balance of the frequencies is for perceived loudness' sake. You might have heard of something called the equal loudness curves or the Fletcher-Munson curves. Their curves look somewhat like this, and the main takeaway that we can take from these curves is just that our ears are more sensitive to upper mid frequencies. So by emphasizing the upper mid frequencies of various sounds, we get a very large perceived boost of volume, even though the actual sound energy, like the pressure energy that is being created, is not much larger. So certain sounds, if you give them a little boost in the high mid frequencies, they seem like they come more towards you, they're more frontal in your face. It's almost like on a camera focusing on an element that might be a bit blurry. But so now that you understand the mixing context and what we're doing, let's come back to that idea of EQ versus saturation. What's the difference? Well, in a simple sense, the EQ changes the balance of the frequencies that are already in the sound, and saturation, on the other hand, it takes a sound that you feed into it and it creates new harmonics. So when you saturate a sound, it almost feels a little bit like an EQ that you're tilting upwards, but it's a different process. The sound is getting brighter, but it's getting brighter from these new harmonics that are being created. Whereas with an EQ, if there are no frequencies already there, you cannot boost what doesn't exist already in the sound. So for example, take this sine wave. This sine wave only has one frequency, and if we run it through an EQ, there's no point boosting the high frequencies of the sine wave because there are no high frequencies there. You can apply an enormous shelf filter and it's not going to do anything except maybe bring up the noise floor that sits behind it. Instead, if you run the same sound through a saturator, several harmonics are going to start being created and the sound is going to start sounding brighter. Now, of course, depending on the saturation algorithm that you're going to use, these harmonics might be nice musical multiples of the fundamental frequency, or they might have a different relationship to the fundamental, which makes them more almost like distortion, let's say. And distortion is a word that's often used just for saturation that's pushed beyond the point where it's just slightly warming up the sound, where it's actually changing the character of the sound. I mean, distortion is used in many different contexts, but in this context, it's usually that. Just saturation that's pushed a little bit further than you would otherwise think, all the way up to like heavy fuzz pedals, which completely degrade the sound by generating an enormous amount of harmonics that radically change the character of the sound. So this fits into the broader context of mixing your music, which is is the technical aspect. But if the musical composition and the technical aspect are all a little bit nebulous, a little bit confusing to you, do check out my Foundations of Electronic Music course, where I go through everything in steps with a workflow and a structure so you can learn without getting lost in random tutorials that are either way above or below your skill level. So when you are in the mix down phase of your song and you're trying to balance the frequencies and you're trying to make a sound brighter, ask yourself the question, is this a sound that should be EQ'd up? Or is it worth trying saturation to add to the harmonics of the sound that are already there? Both approaches can work perfectly well in different scenarios, and feel free to try them both on your material. If you find little tips like this helpful and you want to help me with the algorithm, leave a comment below and like the video. Consider subscribing. Come show us on the Discord channel what you did with this. And until next time, stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye-bye. That's such a stupid idea.